Then I'll introduce Father Coady. Many of you saw him at Mass today, and Father Coady will give a presentation on what is liturgy. And then Randy Milbraith, who is from RDg Planning and Design, will give a presentation about what we hope for in terms of our master plan and what we're going to do in the future. So I'll introduce them as they do their part rather than have them come up and go back and come up and go back. So we'll introduce them as the time comes. So if my projector is at PC2, is that correct? It will be soon enough. And it's still alive. And it works. Okay, we can quit now. We just wanted to make sure that worked. Just wanted to make sure I could do this. So I'm just a 4-year part of a great long history of the Catholic Church at St. James. Some of you come from people that were here from the very beginning. Some of you have been here most of the time. St. James has been a parish. So in our parish directory, I took one of the pictures, one of the older churches, and then a picture of our current church. You're going to see the image of St. James. I asked Randy if I could borrow this. One of the times he was here, Randy Milbraith from RDg, asked me if I could borrow it, but he didn't know I was going to use it in my presentations because he uses it in his. That's a great icon of St. James. You'll see one very often, mostly this symbol of St. James is often a shell. He went out to baptize, to evangelize. We heard from John the Baptist that the new baptism would be with the Holy Spirit and fire. And even if you look at this church, it's in the shape of a shell. Call it a fan or a shell. Many churches are designed and built in that very shape, sometimes with that intention of this baptismal imagery that we're a part of. I did a presentation. Oh, it's going to go twice. Nope, went once. So that's not the first church. That's the brick church downtown, right on Highway 30, or off of Highway 30, the inside of the church. I was too excited, wasn't I? So this is in our pictorial directory. One of the things that we do is we build community, and then we build buildings to hold that community and enhance and nurture that community, that it might grow and thrive and reach out. So in our pictorial directory, it shows some of the building projects which house both our worship and the passing on of our faith. So one of the things that I'm just reading a book called Rebuilt, and one of the things that says our community identity should define our space. So our community identity is that we belong to the Roman Catholic Church throughout the world. 50 years ago, last Wednesday, the first document was the Constitution on the Sacred Liturgy. Paragraph 14 says, Mother Church earnestly desires that all the faithful should be led to that full, conscious, and active participation in liturgical celebrations which is demanded by the very nature of the liturgy. Such participation by the Christian people as a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a redeemed people, is their right and duty by reason of their baptism. So our identity is this incredibly immense, vast, fascinating, mysterious identity that we connect with the church throughout the world. Now, we had a meeting with all the St. James, Prince of Peace, UNK, Kearney Catholic Foundation, and I had to do a presentation about St. James, and so I just pulled out some of the things that we did. So we're about sacraments and faith formation, and you can look at these later. We're not going to go through all of them, and then we have our parking lot collection, that's pretty important. So then we have outreach, and this is just a very few things. Some of you are involved in them, and you're aware of them. You might not be aware of them, but it's incredible things. And then we have our parking lot collection. And then it was here before I got here. I didn't start it. So we have stewardship, some of the things that with stewardship organizations, diocesan appeal, and I did that because Matt Summers always teases me in finance meetings, and I put that there for his sake, and I was going to take it out. But actually, every bit of this is as important as the other. It is how we welcome people and how people come into our space, and that we take care of that, which we are going to take care of it pretty soon. Don't worry. But it takes a lot of money. So anyway, But all of that, and I just put that at the end, but partly for humor and partly because there's nothing insignificant. There's nothing unimportant. We do all of this to build up the community of God. I'll just do this briefly, how this predates me. I came in 2009, but in 2008, about this time in 2008, this really kicked off strongly. You had a great, wonderful celebration at the, what was Catholics on Ice is what I've heard. What do you call that? At the arena. So they started the Catholic Community of Kearney Capital Campaign. As of October the 31st, we have received $954,000. We're almost at $1 million. We hope to be at 1.7. We anticipate this to be a time of community building. We'll include community meetings, surveys, and additional fundraising efforts. So one of the clear communications I would like to give is that we have not made decisions about what we're going to do. We do come from a history and conversations about this. So when I came here, people said, well, when are you going to do something with our part of the capital campaign? And well, first thing we did was, thanks to Bill Rochford, we got glass doors in the front, so they're light in, and the old doors that were falling apart. So now you can see when you come into our church, and it's a little brighter. We've done a few things. That actually, we didn't do that. We had other donations for that. We didn't use capital campaign money. But one of the things that I've heard since I've been here, I didn't create this, but I've heard since I've been here is for years people have talked about enclosing the courtyard. That decision hasn't been made, but that will be part of the conversation. Okay? So we're having a conversation about what buildings will represent how we build community and provide space for that, both for worship and education and administration. So we're in that process. One of the things that I've run into is that we send out these kind of mailings, we give this information, and people still ask me, what happened to that capital campaign money? And what are we doing, like that, after we've been sent out a couple letters. So we have a few coaches that say that you want to over-communicate. So we're trying to over-communicate. It was pledged about $5.5 million. The first $3.5 million went to Prince of Peace. When that was received, we split it 50-50. And you can see in that report down there that's unaudited. Mike Cottle keeps track of this, but Mike Cottle isn't responsible for this. I just took his numbers and put it in a smaller area. So if you wanted to really know the exact information to the penny, Mike Cottle has been great with helping us with that, and we have been having great communication with Prince of Peace about this wonderful campaign. And at the end of it, they should receive $4.5 million, and we should... And this, because of the way the pledges go, that has gone up and down a little bit. We're expecting maybe a 5% drop-off in pledges. Not everybody's going to finish then. Some people move away. So that's been, when we do done reports, that's been as much as $126,000, or $1,026,000, or $998,000. It's going to fall right in there. Nobody's playing with the numbers. We're just guessing how it's going to end up with the best estimates that we have. And right now it looks like we have pledges receivable of 106, and if those come in, it will be over $1 million. It's kind of up to the people that pledged. That's kind of where that comes from. I'm just going to do this briefly. We've talked about it in Mass. We've sent out letters. In November of 2012, I got a group of people together to ask them to make a report to the parish council to assess our property as best we could, to make recommendations on how to use the $1 million. If we're going to do more than that, we'll have to decide that as we go. So we met in November. They met a presentation on March 21st. December 18th, we met with Prince of Peace to ask about their process. January, just about a year ago, we had an informational meeting just to help us with our planning process. In April, we interviewed liturgical consultants, and that's how Father Frank Coady got here. We have been doing educational stuff. We realigned our facility improvement planning team. October, we interviewed 5 firms. We chose RDg Planning and Design. Randy will talk in a little bit. From the master, then we hope to develop a master plan, and there's the names of the facility improvement planning team members. That's all been in mailings and things like that. So what now? What's next? I'm just standing here to give thanks to God for the generosity of so many people who are committed to disciples and dedicated servants in our community. This building did very well for about 15 years, and then you thought, boy, that parish hall that we need, it's about time to put that parish hall on, right? About 15 years later, we're going to, by the generosity of people that donated to the capital campaign, we'll be ready to look at our facilities and take care of what's here and look to the future. If the town grows, our parish grows, we split the parishes. But if the Catholic community of Kearney is going to be like it has been for the last 30 years, it's going to continue to grow. So we have to just take a look at that when we do all our work. So we need to keep it in prayer. In the next 1 to 3 years, we don't know what it'll cost, $1 to $3 million repair, renewal, renovation, and trust that we will continue to grow in faith as we undertake projects, fundraising, and capital campaigns that will enhance our worship and ministry. So, I think that's my last slide. That is? Well, that's the last slide. Questions, observations, gripes, moans, squeals of delight, anguish, indifference, hope, joy, anything Adventi? Yes? The conversation has been to have, huh? Okay, yeah, that's a good. Why would they want to enclose the courtyard? One is to provide more space for gathering space and other activities after Mass. So that's part of the conversation. That's what we're going to decide. That's what we're talking about. That's part of the conversation. So that's part of what we'll be deciding as a parish. Yes?
With that thought in mind, with the courtyard, is there a possibility that maybe these walls could be taken out and we can make this sanctuary area larger as well?
That's part of the conversation. So she wanted to know if we could make the sanctuary area larger, and that will be part of our conversation. It hasn't been decided, but that would be part of the conversation. Good questions. Yes? Is there any talk about doing a cry room? Just if we do another capital campaign. No, just we try to talk about money again. Yes. Well, that will be a part of the conversation if you pass it into the conversation. So today we're not making decisions. We're going to have Father Coady. We're going to gather the questions in January, February, and we'll keep those things in mind. John's taking notes. Okay? So at this point, I'd like to introduce Father Frank Coady. He's next part of the presentation, and when he's done, there will be a break before Randy starts. If you need a break, we're all adults. The bathrooms, there's bathrooms that direction and that direction. Actually, if you just go to those doors and head south, you'll find a bathroom. And so if Father Frank Coady would come forward. Some of you have met him from the meetings we've been in. Some of you, many of you saw him at Mass today. This is Father Frank Coady. He is the priest that is the pastor of the cathedral in Wichita. No, Salina. Sorry about that. In Salina, Kansas. He has done extensive study and work in the liturgical documents of the church and in liturgy, and works in that capacity for his diocese. And so this is Father Frank Coady. Oh yeah, you'll need that. I'll go. It's not ready yet.
Okay.
I'll get you.
Well, one of the things that I do in my capacity as Director of Office of Liturgy for the diocese is help parishes in their worship space, building new churches and remodeling. And so over the years I've done about 15 or 16 of those. And my knowledge has grown through experience more than anything else. And you're in a kind of a good place, I hope, because I've done 14 or 15 before I got to you. Actually, this worked out very well in my own parish. Right now I'm at the cathedral, but For 15 years, I was at St. Elizabeth and Seton Parish in Salina, and we built a new church during my time there. And I had that experience and was able to use it there. And I think I have a few pictures of that I can show you. And that really was a wonderful project because I had been there about 7 or 8 years before we started. So I kind of had their trust before that. Sometimes it's hard to come into a parish new and they don't even know who you are yet, and they haven't built up any trust level with you. But in that case, they had, and so we had a wonderful project. Do I point this back that way or this way?
Yeah, this way would be probably best.
Okay. So I'm going to start out by quoting from the document on the liturgy at Vatican II, because so much of what we understand about liturgy comes from that document. And that document says that the liturgy really began on the cross. It's the blood and water flowing from the side of Christ as he hangs upon the cross. And the water is baptism, and the blood is Eucharist. And that's the source of our sacramental system. So we're incorporated into Christ, and therefore we're associated with him in the liturgy that flows from the cross. By baptism, we're implanted in the paschal mystery. We die with him, so to rise with him. People receive the spirit of adoption as sons and daughters, in which we cry, Abba, Father, and thus become true adorers, such as the Father seeks. Christ always associates the church with himself in this great work, which God is perfectly glorified, and men and women are sanctified. That's one of the age-old things about the liturgy that's been said. It is the glorification of God and the sanctification of humans in one process. To do one is to do the other. Liturgy then is seen as an exercise of the priestly office of Jesus Christ. In the liturgy, the sanctification of women and men is given expression in symbols perceptible by the senses and is carried out in ways appropriate to each of them. Well, that's the sacramental system, isn't it? That we have these perceptible signs and symbols. Sacrament is something tangible, something you can see and touch, but it points to interior, invisible realities. That's our sacramental system. And so it's perceptible by the senses, but it gets us in touch with the divine. It gets us in touch with what is invisible. Not working. In the liturgy, complete and definitive public worship is performed by the mystical body of Jesus Christ, that is, by head and members. What we're saying here is that there's one body of Christ, and we're all celebrating the liturgy together. Christ, the head, is here in the sacraments, and we are his body, and we're doing it together. So, for example, when we see those gifts brought down the aisle and laid upon the altar, we need to think of ourselves, because we're offering ourselves along with the self-offering of Christ. And that together, ours made perfect by its joining to his, makes a fitting praise to the Father. From this it follows that every liturgical celebration, because it is an action of Christ, the priest, and of his body, which is the church, is a preeminently sacred action, and no other action of the church equals its effectiveness by the same title nor to the same degree. In the heavenly liturgy, we take part in the earthly liturgy, we take part in a foretaste of that heavenly liturgy which is celebrated in the holy city of Jerusalem, toward which we journey as pilgrims. You know, for Christ, this is already done. He's already sitting at the right hand of the Father. Remember this morning we talked about that kind of timelessness of God and the timelessness of liturgy. It's already accomplished for Christ. The end has happened. Everything has been joined to him and handed over to the Father. It's all a done deal. And we participate in that doneness even now. I think I went one, yeah. With all the hosts of heaven we sing a hymn of glory to the Lord. You know, there's a sense of this altar being joined to the altar in heaven. And the first Eucharistic prayer has a way of saying that, Father, may your angel take this sacrifice to your altar in heaven. You know, the connection between that altar and this one, that they really are one and the same. And that's possible because of that timelessness of liturgy. And but we also say, don't we, at the end of every preface, and so we join the angels and the saints in proclaiming your glory as we sing. This is the heavenly liturgy. We're joined with the angels and saints in heaven when we do this. The liturgy is the summit toward which the activity of the church is directed. It is also the source from which all its power flows. For the goal of apostolic endeavor is that all who are made children of God by faith and baptism should come together to praise God in the midst of his church, to take part in the sacrifice, and to eat the Lord's Supper. There just isn't anything more important we do all week long than the liturgy. So pastors must ensure that the faithful take part fully aware of what they're doing, actively engaged in the rite and enriched by it. Now that's from Vatican II, and we've been doing that for the last 40 years. We've been trying to educate people so that everybody knows what they're doing. And we've trained extraordinary ministers of communion, and we've trained lectors, and we've trained cantors and organists, and we just do a lot of formation. But if there's some formation that we've lacked, I think it's formation of the assembly. Vatican II says that the assembly is the most important part of the liturgy because we are joined with Christ. It's about what we are praying and what we are doing. But we haven't done a good job, really, of explaining to the assembly what their role is. And we still have a long way to go with that. But being actively engaged in the rite is essential. Now, for 40 years, we've been going through various phases, I think asking different questions about what that means exactly. What do we mean by participation? And we could give a whole talk here about just that. But let me summarize briefly to say participation in the liturgy is primarily about self-offering. We often say that it's about singing, and I noticed this weekend that this is a good singing parish. I really love worshiping with you because you sing. That's a wonderful thing. But is that the essence of participation? No, I don't think so. Responding in the spoken word, not the essence of participation, although it's important. The essence of participation is self-offering. A person who's deaf, who can't hear the word, can still offer themselves. A person who is unable to walk and can't process to communion can still offer themselves. In other words, all of these things have some kind of physical requirements, but self-offering has no physical requirement. It's a requirement of the heart. And standing and sitting and kneeling and processing and signs of the cross and kissing the altar and kissing the gospel book and all of these gestures and motions and everything, they all lead to and feed into self-offering, but that's key. It's very much the wish of the church that all the faithful should be led to take that full, conscious, and active part in liturgical celebrations, which is demanded by the very nature of the liturgy. and to which the Christian people have a right and to which they are bound by reason of their baptism. So what we used to do before Vatican II, praying along with our rosary or with our prayer books, doesn't cut it anymore. Now we're supposed to be actively involved, knowing what we're doing, conscious of what's going on, and praying along. And so that's why singing is important. That's why responding to the prayers is important, because we're supposed to know what we're doing and be actively engaged in it. So we used to say you have to attend Mass on Sunday under pain of mortal sin. Now we say you have to participate in Mass on Sunday under pain of mortal sin. By the way, participating in Mass on Sunday, failure to do so is still considered a mortal sin. So a lot of people forget that. A lot of things dropped with Vatican II. That never did. In the restoration and development of the sacred liturgy, the full and active participation by all the people is the most essential thing. So how does that affect the space requirements for liturgy? There are church documents that give specifics, and we're going to go through the first two here just a little bit. Built of Living Stones is a document written by the U.S. bishops, and I went through that whole document with the committee that is working with this project, but that's a little bit more involved than we need to go today. We'll just hit those first two. The general instruction on the Roman Missal, affectionately called GERM for short, gives directions. Now, what is the germ? For every one of our sacramental rites, there's a separate ritual book, and for each one, there's an instruction, a general instruction right up front that tells what that sacrament is, how it is to be celebrated, who is to do what, and it's the how-to, the directions. And so in the Roman Missal, because the Missal is a big thing, Mass is very important, that general instruction is about 80 pages long. So there's a lot of stuff there. But we're going to kind of concentrate on the certain section that talks about the liturgical space, the environment, which is chapter 5. The arrangement of the altar, the ambo, the chair, places for the faithful, places for the choir and musical instruments, the place of reservation of the Eucharist, and sacred images. So there are some general principles. First of all, churches should be suitable for carrying out the sacred action and for ensuring the active participation of the faithful. Well, that's huge, isn't it? A lot of how we design a church has to do with facilitating the participation by the assembly. Churches should be truly worthy and beautiful and be signs and symbols of heavenly realities. And there's an enormous gamut, isn't there? I mean, you see some very ornate artistic churches and you see some very plain ones. And so from A to Z, we have that all in the Catholic Church. But let me just make one distinction that may be a little bit helpful. The Christian church has been divided since about the 3rd century between East and West. And the East, we often know those as the Orthodox churches, but there are Eastern Rite Catholic churches as well. But the East is from Egypt up through Russia and East. So Greece, Jerusalem, all of that, that's all Eastern Rite churches. And then everything west of that would be Western Rite. We're Western Rite, okay? And in the Eastern churches, their understanding is that in the liturgy, we are elevated to heaven. And so when you go in an Eastern Rite church, it's very elaborate and there are icons everywhere, because if you've gone into heaven, you're going to be standing among the saints. And so the icons are arranged all around the space at eye level because you're standing among the saints, okay? And the Eastern churches, they use incense. I mean, if you don't like incense, you couldn't be an Eastern Rite Catholic. Because the first thing the priest does when the Mass starts is he incenses all the icons in the room. By the time he gets finished, you can't see for the smoke. It's all about mystery. The idea in an Eastern church is that you leave the street once you come into those doors. You've left earth and you've entered heaven. And the church visually reflects that idea. Okay? In the West, our notion is that God came down from heaven and joined our human flesh. And so therefore, he has sanctified this world. So, normally speaking, when we enter into a Western church, we're not expecting to leave earth and enter into heaven. We're expected to find God here. And so our churches, because of that theology, because of that understanding, tend to be much more plain than the Eastern churches. Just kind of a handy distinction. So, for example, this is a pretty plain church. And it comes from a theology of incarnation, that God came here and is here among us. And neither one of them is right or wrong. It's just two different ways of looking at it. And even in the West, you see lots of ornate churches. It's not a clear line of demarcation. Number 3, the church employs the arts to assist in this. She treasures the traditional forms of expression, but also promotes new forms appropriate to each age. So there's no real sacred art. We sometimes think of sacred art as things that happened in the Renaissance or in the Middle Ages, but not necessarily so. We produce religious art now. You know, these windows are done in a style from the 20th century. Now, it wouldn't be wrong to use a style from the Middle Ages, but in other words, the church doesn't really have any preference. It's whatever the local community is comfortable with and capable of, financially and artistically, talent-wise, etc. In commissioning artists and choosing works of art to be admitted into the church, the parish should seek true excellence in art which nourishes faith and devotion and accords authentically with both the meaning and the purpose for which it is intended. And I would say one other thing here. The church generally promotes original art. We have church goods catalogs where you can buy things cheaper that are mass-produced, and then you have the same crucifix that is down the road, that is down the road, that is down the road. But what we really like to promote is original art, utilizing as much of local artists and artisans as possible. And our ancestors often did that when they came from Europe to here. They brought with them the notion that was in their homeland, and so they built things from their memory, from over there, and quite often they had very little money, and so the local artisans did everything. And one example that is a favorite of mine, there's a little church in my diocese in a tiny town called Pfeiffer, near Hayes, and they bought these statues from Europe, and they built the altar from the crates that the statues came in. But they painted it up real nicely, and when you go around that altar, you can't believe, but you can see the shipping marks and everything. They literally built it from the crates that the statues came in, but they did it so artistically that from the front side, it's very impressive. People can be really ingenious when they have to. But they had some nice artisans in the community who were able to do that. Number 4, parish churches should be dedicated with a solemn rite. And that wasn't true before Vatican II. We blessed churches, And then certain churches, like cathedrals, got consecrated. Now that distinction is gone. Every Catholic church gets dedicated, and we're going to go through the rite in that, for that in a minute. Number 5, all who are involved in the work are to consult the diocesan commission on the sacred liturgy and sacred art. And so those didn't exist before Vatican II. Vatican II started those. So now every diocese has some kind of a commission for sacred art and for church architecture. And sometimes that's mostly the bishop and a couple of advisors, but sometimes that's a very elaborate system. Liturgy commissions and liturgy offices started after Vatican II, and they go from a diocese like mine in Salina, where I am the liturgy office, and I have a third-time secretary. And it goes all the way up to the Archdiocese of Chicago that has 47 in the office and 8 secretaries. So from A to Z. Number 6, in the choice of materials, there should be a concern for genuineness and an intent to foster the instruction of the faithful and the dignity of the entire sacred space. Noble simplicity is preferred over ostentation, but of course that's a call that each community has to make. Define noble simplicity, define ostentation. I mean, that's all up for debate. Not limiting decoration to the sanctuary, but spreading it around the room. Let me give you an example of an undignified lack of genuineness of material. I was in a parish for a few years, and the altar was made of formica, and the documents are crystal clear that stone is preferred, but noble wood is acceptable in the United States. We have an indult in the United States because wood is so much more prevalent here than stone is, like it is in Europe. However, it should be real wood, and it should be solid materials, not plywood covered with formica. Okay? Number 7, the people of God gathered for Mass has a coherent and hierarchical structure which finds its expression in the variety of ministries and the variety of actions according to the different parts of the celebration. So there are places for priests and deacons, places for choir and musicians, places for the assembly. The arrangement of the sanctuary. It should be marked off from the body of the church either by its being somewhat elevated or by a particular structure and ornamentation. So here it's elevated, isn't it? And is it my imagination, or is that a slightly different color in the flooring? Okay, so you've got a little bit of both. You've got elevation and you've got a separation of color. Oops. Back more. Okay. Yeah, you are, but somehow you have an earlier version because it doesn't have the pictures in it. Yeah, it's called restoration or something like that. Recovered file 1.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that. That's not obvious. Yeah. No, keep going. Well, go back to that. We are pilgrims journeying toward the kingdom, and one of the ways we celebrate that in the liturgy is through processions. In the Catholic Church, we don't bring communion and pass it down the row. We make you come and get it, because the procession is part of the experience. You're processing to the table of the kingdom, processing toward the kingdom. And all liturgical processions symbolize that. The larger procession of our entire lives toward the kingdom and of the human race toward the kingdom, all of that is ritualized in procession. And so processional aisles are very important in the Catholic Church. And they're not so important in Protestant churches because people don't move in Protestant churches. But we Catholics move. And when you have an adequate gathering space where everyone can gather out there, then there are times of the year when you want to do certain rituals out there, like blessing the palms, blessing the Easter fire, and then everybody processes in together. So then you really get the notion of procession. But we have processions every day. At least the priest and a few other ministers process. And everyone processes to communion. So aisles are important. Next. And here is a church with extra wide side aisles. And you can just see I guess I'm not using it right. Go back to that, Father. You can see one of the Stations of the Cross up on the left between the two windows. And the reason I'm showing you this is because in several churches we've designed these wide aisles so that when you do the Stations of the Cross, everyone can process, not just the priest. Because Stations of the Cross is a processional liturgy, isn't it? You process from Station 1 to Station 2 to Station 3, etc. So movement is very important. Okay, now let's see if we can get caught up to where we were. Okay, there you see a sanctuary that's only one step high. But it's obvious because it's black. And the black tile is that you can't see it in this picture, but it's actually shiny. And the altar actually reflects, it's almost like a reflecting pool. It's beautiful, but it also clearly defines the sanctuary space. Okay? The design of the altar incorporates three realities. It's an altar of sacrifice, it's the table of the Lord by which people are called together to participate in the Mass, and it's the center of the thanksgiving that is accomplished through the Eucharist. So altars are hard to design. How do you design an altar that somehow holds all three of those things together? It's a table of fellowship meal, but it's also an altar of sacrifice. And one of the documents on the liturgy suggests that the altar needs to be able to hold the weight of the mystery that's celebrated there, visually hold that. So there has to be some kind of massiveness to it. And I have a couple of examples to show you here. There's a kind of a stability, a massiveness. And one of the things we mean by altar in the Catholic Church is it's primarily the mensa. The mensa is the tabletop part. And so often you see massive legs and then a skinny little top. That's getting it the other way around. It's not about the legs that hold it up, it's about the top. And so you see here that top is about 8 to 12 inches thick. And actually in this particular one, everything there is made of wood, but the top is actually stone. And this one is made entirely of stone and white marble, and that's actually a deep brown kind of granite, and on a brick floor. So there's a noble simplicity to that, but it looks heavy, doesn't it? It looks like it could carry the weight of the mystery that's being celebrated there. Okay, next. Moderation should be observed in the decoration of the altar. It shouldn't become the backdrop for displays of various kinds during different liturgical seasons. Floral decoration should be moderate and placed around the altar rather than on the mensa. Minimal flowers during Advent and none during Lent, and only what is required for Mass may be placed on the altar. You do a good job of that here. You see there's nothing on that altar. And the only things that go on the altar are the bread and the wine and the book. And if you kind of keep to that, then it without even having to say it, it becomes a sacred place that you don't just put anything on. It's a place for the mystery of the Mass. Candles should be placed on the altar or around it. They should be proportionate to the size and style of the altar and should never get in the way of viewing the action at the altar. There's to be a cross with the figure of Christ crucified upon it, either on the altar or near it, clearly visible to the assembled congregation. So you have the one on the wall there. That actually, we often refer to that as a wall cross, but in this case, technically, that's the altar cross required. Now, it doesn't have to be a big thing on the wall, but that's the choice that's been made here. Okay? The ambo should ordinarily be stationary and not simply a movable lectern. You really have two tables in the liturgy. You have the table of the Word and the table of the Eucharist. And we get nourished at both tables. We get fed by the Word of God, and we get fed by the body and blood of Christ. And we're spiritually nourished by both. So they're both referred to kind of as tables. And you see in the design of that, it's a little bit table-like, isn't it? And the way they're situated here, there's a kind of a prominence to both. There's a connection between the two. And there's nice movement between the two, because here the liturgy of the Word is in one place and it moves to another place. Now, in medieval European churches, that was even more exaggerated. If you've ever traveled in Europe or seen pictures, sometimes halfway down the nave, there will be one of those big, elaborate pulpits hanging off of a column with a spiral staircase going up to it. You know, I've always wanted to preach from those. I've never had a chance. And but what's the reason for that? First reason is sound falls. And that's why we used to have choir lofts, because the sound falls. Before you had PA systems, that's how they amplified sound, was they put the speaker up high so that the sound of his voice would fall on the assembly. So what people would do is they would gather around under that big pulpit and they would have the word fall down upon them. And then when that was over, they would all process down and they'd stand around the altar. So everybody moved. Now, what's key in those is they didn't have pews. It's just a big bare floor. So people could do that. They could gather around one place and then move and gather around another place. The ambo should be in keeping with the design of the church and situated so that the ordained ministers and lectors can be clearly seen and heard. Well, this is a radical example. That's a very ornate ambo. But it's in an ornate church, and it fits there. That wouldn't fit here, would it? That's what we mean by it should be in keeping with the design of the church. From the ambo, only the readings, the responsorial psalm, and the Easter proclamation are to be proclaimed. It may also be used for giving the homily. I always love to point that out. It may be used for giving the homily. But there are 3 places specifically mentioned for the homily. One of them is the chair. In fact, the first one is the chair. And the third one is any place the priest wants to preach from. Like here, for example. But the real point here is, just like you don't put anything on the altar except what belongs there, you don't say anything from the ambo except the Word of God. Okay? Either in its written form or its preached form, one or the other. Or its sung form in the case of the responsorial psalm. But the responsorial psalm is scripture, and that's why it can be proclaimed from the ambo. Next. Hit 2 there. The chair for the priest celebrant must signify his office of presiding over the gathering and of directing the prayer. Thus, the best place for the chair is in a position facing the people at the head of the sanctuary, unless the design of the building or other circumstances impede this. And any appearance of a throne should be avoided, except for bishops. Bishops get thrones. And so the head of the sanctuary, that's pretty much done here. What the document has in mind more is a centralized church where the chair would be elevated a couple more steps up behind the altar. Now, when it says that other circumstances might impede that, an example might be in many churches you have a tabernacle there. Well, so you don't put the priest in front of the tabernacle. You have to find another place for it. So in other words, there are certain principles, but then you have to adjust according to the church that you're dealing with. The arrangement of the church. Places should be arranged with appropriate care for the faithful so that they are able to participate in the sacred celebrations visually and spiritually in the proper manner. Benches or chairs are expedient, but they're not required. Pews are a Protestant American invention. They're not really Catholic. Why do Protestants like pews? Because Protestant liturgy is passive. It's like an audience. You don't really participate in a Protestant church. It's done for you and you listen to it. And that's why their pews are always more comfortable. In a lot of evangelical churches, it's like theater chairs, and they even rock. They have everything except cup holders. Because that's their worship style. I mean, it's a passive kind of worship. But ours is very active, and pews get in the way of being active. My favorite example is one time I was on sabbatical, and there was a new church in Lawrence that I had helped design. And I designed several churches with these new immersion fonts, but I had never actually been in a parish where that happened, and I wanted to see how this worked at the Easter Vigil. I wanted to watch it. And so I was on sabbatical, and I was living in Topeka at the time, and it's near Lawrence, so I drove over for the Easter Vigil. And so I'm there about halfway back, and it comes time for the baptisms, and so the priest invites everyone to go back and stand around the font. And so immediately to my right is a young family with a fussy child, and they're obviously not going to do anything, so I turn to my left. And just as I'm turning to my left, this 70-something woman says to her husband, "I'll be damned if I'm moving from this spot." So there I was, stuck. Now, I'm not arguing that we get rid of the pews, but I want you to understand my point, that they do impede good Catholic liturgy, because they impede us from moving, and moving is very key to Catholic liturgy. Care should be taken that the faithful be able not only to see the priest, the deacon, and the lectors, but also, with the aid of modern technical means, to hear them without difficulty. That's one of the beauties of this church, is you can hear without difficulty. And I'm stationed in a church that's just the opposite of this. When you get it loud enough so that they can hear, it starts bouncing around. And so they've got plenty of audibility, but there's an echo, and so and we have a lot of old people in my parish, and so it's a problem. You don't have that problem here. Next. The choir should be positioned in the church so as to make clearly evident its character as part of the gathered community of the faithful, fulfilling a specific function. This is one of the things we've struggled with the most since Vatican II, because this requirement has been there from the beginning, but where do you position them so that they have a leadership position, and yet they're part of the assembly? And I mean, I think that balance can be found, but it's always a struggle, and that's going to be part of our conversation along with all the other issues. The location should also assist the choir to exercise its function more easily and conveniently allow each choir member full sacramental participation in the Mass. Because since they are part of the assembly, they're supposed to be participating in Mass too. Next. The organ and other lawfully approved musical instruments are to be placed in an appropriate place so that they can sustain the singing of both the choir and the congregation and be heard with ease by all if they are played alone. Next. In Advent, the organ and other musical instruments should be used with a moderation that is consistent with the season's character and does not anticipate the full joy of the Nativity of the Lord. In Lent, the playing of the organ and musical instruments is allowed only to support the singing. Most parishes don't obey this. But I find that the assembly sings better a cappella, because the organ normally takes care of it for them. So they get lazy and they let the organ do it. But once you take away the organ, they start hearing themselves and they start singing better. And in every parish I've been for the last 15, 20 years, I just mandate that. No organ during Lent. And so we sing a Mass setting that everybody knows and that's easy to do a cappella, and it works just fine. Next. The Blessed Sacrament should be reserved in a tabernacle and a part of the church that is truly noble, prominent, readily visible, beautifully decorated, and suitable for prayer. There's a lot in that statement. We sometimes put it in a closet. I mean, that was the complaint. You put the sacrament in a closet. And well, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but there's some truth to that too. We sometimes put it in a place that was too small and undecorated, almost as if we didn't hold any veneration for it. We're getting much better at that. The one tabernacle should be immovable, be made of solid and inviolable material that is not transparent, and be locked in such a way that the danger of profanation is prevented to the greatest extent possible. You know, real strong concern here for the safety and the reverence for the reserved Eucharist. Next. The tabernacle should not be on an altar on which Mass is celebrated. Now, that used to happen before Vatican II all the time. But Vatican II outlawed that and said you can't have the tabernacle on a Mass on an altar where Mass is being said. It should be located according to the judgment of the diocesan bishop either in the sanctuary apart from the altar of celebration, in a form and place more appropriate, not excluding on an old altar no longer used for celebration. Well, you have those churches in your diocese, I'm sure, where there's an old high altar there with a tabernacle in it, but it's no longer used as an altar, is it? There's another altar in front of it, so that's legitimate to do. But then you should take all of the altar cloths off of that. There's only one altar allowed in a Catholic church. And so all the altar cloths should be taken off of all those side altars and everything. They shouldn't be dressed up like altars if we're not using them as altars. Or it can be in some chapel suitable for the faithful's private adoration and prayer, and organically connected to the church and readily visible to the Christian faithful. Well, that's something like you have here. But here is a completely separate chapel. It adjoins the church, and, it's readily visible. Everybody knows where it is. But the tabernacle is the tower there, just under the windows. And in this particular case, this is a 24-hour adoration chapel for the whole city, with its separate entrance and separate restroom and separate heating and air conditioning and everything, so that the rest of the church can be locked, but this is always accessible. And so there are one or two people praying in there around the clock, around the year. And would you go back to that? You notice the pew chairs are in what we call choir stall fashion, facing each other. That's because in this chapel, before daily Mass, morning prayer is prayed there. And the idea that with Liturgy of the Hours is that the reason you split side by side, we did that in our prayer this afternoon, left, right, men, women, is that one side proclaims the scripture, which is a psalm in that case. One side proclaims to the other side a verse, and then they hear it from the other side. So proclamation and hearing happen over and over again during that liturgical service. Next. Images of the Lord, the Blessed Virgin Mary, and the saints should be displayed for veneration by the faithful in sacred buildings, arranged so as to usher the faithful toward the mysteries of faith celebrated here. Care should be taken that their number not be increased indiscriminately, and that they not distract attention from the celebration itself. There was a time when we just kind of added more and more saints, and nowadays the understanding is they should be saints who are actually venerated by this community. So St. James would be an obvious example, but are there another, well, Mary, but other than that, are there another saint or two that are venerated in this diocese or in this parish? In other words, care should be taken that you don't just indiscriminately add saints. There should usually be only one image of any given saint. Next. So this is the rite of the dedication of a church and an altar. And notice that the focus is first of all on the altar and then on the church. Next. The rite begins outside the church. Now this is when we're dedicating a new church or a church that has been renovated rather radically so that it's basically a new space. And one of the determinations is if it has a new altar, so that you dedicate that new altar and rededicate the space. So the rite begins outside the church. Someone unlocks the door so that the bishop may enter, and then he is followed by other ministers and the assembly. And then the next thing that happens is the font is blessed. The bishop takes blessed water from the font to the altar and sprinkles it, and then he sprinkles the walls and the people. Next. After the liturgy of the word, the main parts of the dedication begin. The altar is anointed with chrism, then the walls are anointed. And if you look closely, you can see that the bishop is rubbing chrism over the top of the altar. Next. Then the altar is incensed, and then the people and the walls are incensed. The altar is clothed with a white cloth, and the altar candles are lit. Then the dedication candles along the walls are lit. Okay, so let's stop here for a minute. In a sense, the altar gets baptized. It gets sprinkled with baptismal water. Then it gets incensed. Then it gets anointed with chrism. People get anointed with chrism after baptism. Then it gets clothed with the altar cloth, and we get clothed with the baptismal garment. And then it gets candles lit, and the newly baptized get a lighted candle. It's very much like a baptism. But in this case, everything that happens to the altar then happens to the walls and to the people. So it emanates out from the altar. And the walls of a Catholic church get anointed in 12 places. And there are 12 dedication candles that get lit on the walls. You can imagine why. There are 12 tribes of Israel. There are 12 apostles of the Lamb. We are built on the foundation of those 12 apostles and those 12 tribes. And so there's a wonderful symbolism there. After Holy Communion, the bishop takes the leftover hosts and places them in the tabernacle. He genuflects and returns to his chair. Period. We in the United States tend to overemphasize the tabernacle. All that happens in the dedication rite is he takes the leftover hosts and puts them in the tabernacle, genuflects, and goes back to his chair. That's it. He doesn't incense it. He doesn't sprinkle it with holy water. He doesn't light a candle. He doesn't do anything. Now, I'm not saying that the reserved Eucharist isn't important. Obviously, it's important to our faith. But it doesn't compare to the altar in any way. But when you put the tabernacle directly behind the altar, what do Catholics do when they come in? They genuflect to the tabernacle. They don't bow to the altar. The altar gets ignored out of a preference for the tabernacle. What you have here is a separation between the two so that you can give due honor to the altar. It's kind of an important thing. That's it. So this is just a kind of a taste of what is to come, because Father Joe, the architect, and this committee, they are going to be working over the next months to employ these and other principles, and also to hear from you, and you're going to hear something about that right now. There's going to be a process in which everyone will be able to participate and but be led by the committee and Father Joe and the architect and myself, and we'll guide you through this process, and hopefully we'll come up with the best possible space for our worship.